Hey there, Internet Drifters. It's Izanami-kun, and I'm here with what may end up being the last play and write for a while. Play and write number 12, and today we're going to be writing about... I don't know how to say his name. I want to call him Wolle, because, I mean, Wolle, right? But I don't know. It might be Wall, which sounds funny to me, but it could be. It could also be Wally, which kind of gives me a little bit of the giggles to think about him being Wally. Like, you know, like the little robot, Wally. So that's what we got. And instead of doing a normal play and write, because I am a little bit preoccupied with a different writing project and not really feeling the creative juices like normal, I had somebody contact me and write in a potential story for me. So we're just kind of gonna go over what they got out of it and sort of see if it rolls with what we've experienced. So we've got Christian Wally, whatever Alberts. I think Wolle, because like Wolle, you know, that's I'm thinking I'm gonna go with that, Wolle. So he's 54. And he was around for 136 years, which he, you know, the math has been done for me. Been in cryostasis 82 years. And he was a pod crash that was affiliated from nothing and no one. Just considered a space refugee. I'm gonna assume that he actually came from like a space thing and probably from a far off world that has nothing to do with any of the factions that we have on our planet. So this, I'm gonna say no. Because, I mean, he was a space refugee. If he was something else, then he would be from a faction like Matt's was. I believe it was Matt's that came down and we had to go rescue him, and he was actually from the pirate faction. And it said that he was from the pirate faction right before we rescued him, and then he just immediately joined us. So he wasn't a space refugee, even though he came from space, I think. I mean, we really don't know if he came from space or if he was just launched in a pod launcher, but either way, he wasn't called a space refugee. This guy was called a space refugee, so I'm going to go with space refugee, that he has nothing to do with the factions that are on the planet we're on. Whatever faction he was from is a distant planet that isn't in any way affiliated with the factions that we have. So he was a game fanatic in his childhood. I like this idea that he was obsessed with video games or tabletop games like D&D. I kind of agree. I mean, you're right, he could be into LARP games as well, but he doesn't really seem to be a very active sort of person. Although his crafting skill may have come from him liking the idea of LARP or whatever that one is where you actually make like foam weapons and like beat each other up. I don't know what that's called, but that I think maybe he was into, and then decided that he wasn't into actually doing the fighting because he's a wimp. But I could see him going from game, you know, a game obsession into this tool mechanic thing via making those like foam weapons, and then maybe making regular weapons, and then whatever planet he was on, they were all like, well, we could really use you making these tools because we don't need swords, we need tools. And, you know, him becoming a tool mechanic from there. In all those cases, his basic needs were provided. I tend to agree. Yeah, he obviously was in a colony where he didn't have to do cooking much. He didn't have to do any plants because he can't do plant work. He didn't really need to do a whole lot of things, but he did do construction and mining, and he even has some intellectual and social skills, which I think intellectual comes from the game design thing. But I mean, all around, he obviously did some other things, you know. He wasn't just doing game design and tool mechanic. Whoever raised him must have given him a lot of freedom or neglect. I agree. He probably had a distant family situation. The fact that he hates women makes me wonder if he was raised by his father and maybe his mother like fucked off and maybe built a whole other family without him and just left him there. Like that would really, that's not like something that absolutely leads to misogyny, but it's definitely a good setup for it. I think if you don't have a female figure in your life, or if the female figure in your life is a pushover, it's easy to become a misogynist, I think. Although I don't know, I'm not really a misogynist myself, so I guess I don't know completely. So possibly his childhood is what formed his traits. I mean, isn't that always, it's usually the case. If he was a video gamer that was into something like EverQuest or WoW or some other MMO, then him sitting in his parents' basement spending most of his waking hours naked and playing the game would account for him being a wimp and a nudist. That is true, and he may have thought himself to be a badass. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that that makes him into a misogynist though. I mean, he had to have some other qualities that may have made him have damaging beliefs about women. I don't know that that would have made him hate women by like on its own. I don't know that video games don't really do that. Video games just teach you to ignore women as people. Like it teaches you maybe at worst to objectify them. But I don't know that I've ever, I mean, maybe GTA sometimes has a woman hating vibe with all the prostitutes and everything, but I mean, even that, it's still kind of just objectifying everybody. I mean, you can hate everybody equally in GTA 5, so I don't know that that's a fair comparison. Most games kind of just give this idea that women are to be used or they're to be loved. Like there's always an action upon them. They're not actually people that have equal rights and equal thoughts and everything sometimes, and that's sort of a systemic thing in this, you know, far off world set in like, what is it, like 2700. I think they're supposed to be like 2500, 2700, hundreds of years in the future. One would hope that the games themselves had even better themes as far as male female. So I think this misogyny must have come from something personal. And you know, once you believe something hardcore, it's really hard for reality to tell you that it's wrong. Even when it's very, very wrong. And I like this comment of, you know, no judgment of wimpy gamer nerds being wimpy or gamers or nerds, because a lot of times they're not. But there are, I mean, come on, if you're a wimpy gamer nerd out there, don't be shy. Don't be hating yourself. It's fine. We don't need everybody to be super strong. We don't need everybody to be super into doing active things. That's totally fine. Be who you are and let your wimpy gamer nerd flag fly. But I'm right there. Hating women or hating men. Just don't hate people. Hating in general, it's just shitty and will ruin your life. You're totally spot on, man. I agree. Hate's bad. Don't be a hater. Okay, so tool mechanic is a weird title. It is a weird title because you're right. A mechanic that like all mechanics works with tools. But I assume you're right. He must be a mechanic that maintained giant tools, like heavy construction machinery, or maybe he created tools that were used on like big machinery. Like if you've ever seen videos about tools, I watched this thing where they were making a giant nut, and I don't mean like squirrel nut like pecan or hazelnut. I mean like nuts and bolts nut. And this nut was like legitimately bigger than my car in diameter. It was enormous. And I watched them shape it, and like it was hot, like red hot shaping it. Like it was insane. The things that people can do. It's a very active profession. I don't see this guy being that kind of machinist or mechanic. I mean, he could have been a machinist though. He could have been the kind in the middle where they're not making the little ass tools. They're still making some pretty big tools, but they're handleable. Like you can move them around. You don't need like that nut that was like the size of my car. You definitely need some extra equipment. Like they're using construction equipment just to move the damn thing around. Like it's pretty intense. But if you're a machinist and you're, making things out of a mill or a lathe or whatever, you can still do that and still kind of be a little bit wimpy. Maybe, if he's a tool mechanic, maybe he's the guy that works on the mill. He's not the guy who uses the mill to make the tool. He's the guy that upkeeps the mill itself, like one of those giant fucking mills. Or a giant lathe, or one of those weird ones that's sort of both. I know they exist somewhere, I'm sure. Like he uses those big ass tools that other guys that maybe are a little more active, they can sling around 50 pounds here and there to actually get that steel working in the lathe and mill and stuff. But he actually upkeeps the tool itself, the mechanic of the tool of whatever. So I could see that being what he does. I don't think he maintained regular tools. I guess a bandsaw. Yeah, I guess he could also probably do that too. I think a bandsaw is a little bit smaller, but yeah, he probably would be the guy that upkept the things, the tools themselves, the machines themselves that machinists used or other crafters used to make actual things with. So this whole crafting applies to clothing and weapons and rolling joints and chiseling blocks and producing medicine and other drugs. I've really been thinking about this, and a lot of these backstories don't really apply to what we can do in RimWorld. Like when you think about it, we can't play video games. There's no video game console. You can't make a video game as a colonist. That's not something that you could do. That would be awesome if they included that. If they made you had to make a lab or a game R&D lab or whatever, and you had to make a computer and all that other stuff. That would be really cool if they allowed you to do that. And I think they should at some point add that in, because how do you jump from basically being a little better than hunter-gatherer civilization and farming your own food? How do you jump from that to boom, you're making your own spaceship with an AI core? I feel like there should be some computers in there in the middle. But since right now there aren't computers in the middle, we just have to assume that they're coming from civilizations with more technology than we have the capacity to understand. Because we can only have, I think at most, 15 to 20 people. I read somewhere that on Randy Random, if you do it right, you can get like 50 people, but I think most of the time it's 15 to 20. But computers and video games and all that stuff, I think that sort of needs like thousands of people in a city, not just in a little colony. I mean, I can kind of see why you'd mention all of that, but like we can't... I think these have a little bit more freedom than the game itself allows us to do after the fact. So he will be good at all of these things, or at least he can follow instructions on all of these things, or he can intuit how to do them because he's had so much instruction or experience with different mechanic-y things that, yeah, he can just kind of slide into whatever crafting role is necessary. I agree with this. I don't see him having a hard life either. He is still a wimp. And that is a reduced pain threshold before you're down. And he will hit his thumb with a hammer and then be completely out of commission for the rest of the day. Which is why we're going to have him as a shooter, so he's ranged. Hopefully he will be the last person that is hit. And since we have a potential quest coming up where we might have to actually have him fight, that is pretty much what I'm going to do. If that's what ends up happening, I am just going to have him in the background and everybody else gets hit first. And by the time he's the one meleeing, if he's meleeing, we've already accepted that we're fucked. Because he's a wimp. But he is fantastic at crafting, so that specific situation may still happen because we needs must, man. He's got a 6 in shooting. He is not sitting on the sidelines. Wimp or not, he's gonna be shooting. He's just gonna be the last line of defense in a melee capacity. He's gonna be behind everything and everyone possible. He probably worked at several companies. Okay, I guess that's a possibility. I don't know for sure. Like, there's nothing in here that says one way or the other, so we can go with that. And is a freelancer that takes projects to pique his interest or make a large profit. Maybe, and that might be why he was sailing across the stars, because he was like, I bet there's some place out there. Maybe he was actually going somewhere. Well, but a space refugee. Something must have happened on his home planet, I would say, that made it impossible to continue living there. And he probably got on one of the escape pods as a refugee because he has such high crafting, and, you know, they just shot him in a direction. And they may have actually shot him at our planet and were like, figure it out. I mean, if you're talking about a planet, that's thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions. I don't know if any of the colony satellite planets would have gotten up to those numbers, but certainly hundreds of thousands of people is entirely possible. They needed to get people off the planet. They would just start shooting them at other fucking planets and be like, you'll get there eventually. Being that skilled in this field is probably how he was also able to maintain being a misogynist. You're probably right. There aren't a lot of women in mechanic positions. 500 years in the future, maybe that's changed, but I'm sure he could have finagled it to be in whatever dying male-only fields there were. Being poor makes it to where you don't get the luxury of being discriminatory. I don't know if that's really true. I've seen a lot of poor people be discriminatory. Because whoever you discriminate against might be right next to you, busting their ass to survive as well. Which might be true, but in today's society, I don't know that really matters. People seem to... Man, you can discriminate in any sort of situation. That's a choice. It's not something that's thrust upon you. I mean, you have certain scenarios that make it easier. So if you have a shitty mom, or a mom that fucked off and built a whole family and just decided to forget about you, yes, that sets you up absolutely to hate women. That is still your choice to hate women by generalizing whatever mommy issues you'd have on every woman you ever meet. That's not something that happens on accident. That's something that at some point you'd have to decide to project that onto everybody. Whatever woman came into his life next after he made that assumption about his mom and decided that she was a terrible person. That next woman, like, he had to just assume that she was going to be exactly the same. And even if that choice didn't seem like a choice to him at the time, I guarantee there was definitely not a choice to give anybody the benefit of the doubt. That's why he's a misogynist. So I'm going to say that's a choice. I assume Miss Cryo is probably spent between planets that contracted his abilities. Assuming that he ever left the one he was born on before he had to become a refugee. Must have been interesting projects that could wait years. That's true. If there were projects, I mean, if you're building like a bridge, a giant bridge, you might be willing to wait a few years to make sure that it gets done right. Or maybe it's a structure that's pre-existing that needs to be improved, but the machines themselves that are making the parts break down. I don't know, that, or they hire somebody to oversee the machines before they break down as a 20-year project. Yeah, they could probably wait 10 years for him just to arrive, I guess. Maybe. How did he fall out of the sky? I still like the idea that he was shot, like his home planet was devastated in some way, and like maybe it was taken over and he was like the last of a bunch of people to get off the planet. Who knows? Have you I'm sure you've had an invasion, an insect infestation. Maybe the whole planet was infested with insects, and there was just too many of them, and they needed to just get off the damn planet. The most entertaining idea that they have is that he pissed off a female spaceship captain. He was on the way to a job and was disdainful and outright rude to a career starship captain that was female. She put him into a brig, tranquilized him while he was asleep, then put him into the cryosleep and shot him at the next planet. Maybe, as a refugee, he might have actually, if he was contracted to important places because of his skills, he might have been a refugee on a spaceship that was taking him someplace important, and he may have just pissed off a captain in the process that did that. I could totally buy that. That may have taken years. I mean, since the ships are pretty much flown by themselves, I don't know that we would have needed a spaceship captain. But then again, maybe they have to like defrost every few years or so to make sure that nothing's gone wrong. And maybe after a few times of that defrosting, she was just like, "No, man, no, we're not doing this anymore. You're gonna go." She could have left him frozen in her hold, waiting for the right planet to shoot him at. Oh well, that might have been nice to be like, "Hey, find a way to survive," instead of just shooting him out into the vastness of space. Because she's not a monster, he is. That does mean she must have been pretty vindictive or hateful herself. But it depends on what he did. And I don't know, he hasn't really seemed to be that bad yet. But I guess he hasn't had a whole lot of interactions either. I think maybe they were trying to shoot refugees at planets anyway. And maybe she bumped him up on the list to get rid of him so that she didn't have to deal with him anymore. So in that way, it wouldn't seem as much of a dick move, but more of like you get preferential treatment just because nobody wants to deal with you. Have fun. As a side note, Wolle likes to make guns. Well, it doesn't say that on here, so I'm guessing that you are making that up as part of our news story, and I'll totally buy that. He does like shooting. He is interested in shooting and crafting. That's really all he enjoys in this world. And he doesn't really enjoy them all that much. So, I wonder what he probably looks at other people that have actual passions and he's all like, how do you guys even bother? Like, that's just way too much energy. There's nothing that fun that I could do for work. You're crazy. He has only really fired them in testing, and that's probably true. He probably hasn't been battle tested much. I mean, he's got 1 in melee, so he must have, like, had a little bit either training or experience in hand-to-hand combat, but not really, not much. All in all, I think this story definitely hits the spot there. I mean, not a whole lot to add. Wolle is, he's not a great man, but he's not the worst man. He's kind of like what I assume the people of today are going to seem like to people 30 years from now. An old man that grew up with gaming and doesn't like women and was a mechanic. I could totally see that being a person from my generation, that in another 20 years, 20 or 30 years, this is how we'll see them. This is exactly what we will be looking at. That's all we have for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a little different. Like if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check me out on Patreon. Check out my website, izanamikun.com, and I'll see you guys in the next video.